Hi folks, welcome back to this day of Top's Edge and our ongoing global war scenario. November-December 1939 was a relatively long turn, but very uneventful. As a matter of fact, I don't think either side made any attacks the entire turn. The Germans did complete the redeployment of their army and air force to the west. They're poised here, ready to go into the Low Countries. I think they were waiting for some good weather, which unfortunately never materialized in November, December. We'll see if they're patient enough to wait until springtime or if they'll go in next turn. They left a few corps over in Poland as a garrison and to keep an eye on the Soviets to make sure they don't break the pact. For the Western Allies, the Commonwealth would really like to give as much aid to France as she can, but she's limited by the foreign troop commitment rule, and Gort, being the only headquarters available, is limiting them to only a total of 3 ground units right now in France. They are sending some transports to pick up Wavell here in Alexandria and bring him back, which will allow them to increase their commitment on the continent. The French, meanwhile, are in the process of sort of organizing their reserves and are going to try to get them deployed to extend their line up to meet the BEF. The Italians have reinforced Balbo in Libya, which is making it difficult for the Commonwealth to really pull everybody out of Egypt because they don't want to leave the Suez Canal completely undefended. They're planning on bringing some Indian troops over to the Middle East to help garrison Suez in case the Italians decide to get actively involved. In China, not much happened there either. The Japanese did manage to grab the rest of the Chinese coastline west of Hong Kong. And in the central sector, they've begun bringing troops down from Manchuria to build up there in an effort to maybe launch some attacks once the weather gets better in the spring. And both sides here in Manchuria have decided to withdraw as many troops as they feel prudent. Zhukov is on his way back to Europe, where the Soviets are probably going to be expected to demand Bessarabia once they get a little bit more force there to make the threat actually credible. The United States, the entry level at the end of November, December 39, you can see they've got 8 points worth of chits in the German pool and 7 in the Japanese pool, which gives them really about a 14 or 15 entry level against all of the major Axis powers. So we'll see if the U.S. starts to throw their weight around here shortly, and we're also waiting to see when the Germans decide to make their big move in the West. January, February 1940, coming up soon. Well, January, February 1940, and the Axis have one initiative. They decided to let the Allies go first because the Germans wanted to maintain that +1 initiative modifier that they have for the upcoming good weather turns. So the Royal Navy took advantage of that to sortie and try to cover all of the sea lanes, anticipating that the Germans might come out of port in the bad weather. There was very bad weather that first impulse, and accordingly, the Germans decided to sortie their fleet. The Atlantischer fleet was able to avoid the pickets in the North Sea before ending up in the Faroes Gap, where they also avoided the Commonwealth ships patrolling there. However, they did manage to find the convoys, and they ended up sinking 3 convoy points. They damaged another 3, and they boarded the final 2, as well as the single Danish cruiser that was escorting them. Now, the long-range raiders, Graspe and Deutschland, made it all the way out to the central Atlantic without being detected. However, they failed to find the convoy points there. The very next impulse, the Royal Navy reacted. The home fleet, which had been kept in London to wait to see where the Germans might end up, sailed into the Faroes Gap, but despite the weather improving slightly, the British were unable to find the Germans there. However, in the central Atlantic, a small cruiser force led by HMS Gloucester did manage to find Graspe and Deutschland. In the ensuing battle, Deutschland was damaged in return for HMS Manchester being damaged and the Leander being aborted back to Gibraltar. With Deutschland trying to return to Germany damaged, Graf Spee thought it would be a good idea to accompany her, and unfortunately for them, they ran into a small cruiser force waiting for them in the North Atlantic, led by HMS Berwick, accompanied by HMS York, Achilles, and Orion. And the ambush of the British cruisers managed to sink both of the German raiders in exchange for the two smaller British cruisers being aborted. Now, we are still in the middle of January, February, and I wanted to stop the game to show you guys a more detailed example of play. Germany has just declared war on the Netherlands, despite it being snow in the North Temperate. There was zero reaction from the United States, and what we'll do is show you kind of a step-by-step how the rest of this impulse is going to unfold with the invasion. Change of plans. Turns out there really wasn't anything to see with the invasion of the Netherlands. The Dutch had a single infantry corps which set up here in Amsterdam. It was a 4-strength corps, and the Germans were able to launch a 40-strength land attack from these 3 hexes, from Rotterdam, this hex here, and here. And because of the surprise impulse, they were able to ignore the river hex side from Rotterdam and the one from the northeast as well. They also flew in 8 factors of air support, most of which you see rebased here into the Netherlands after the attack. And with the snow, the air factors were halved. However, because it was a surprise impulse, they were doubled, so that offset or negated the snow. That gave an attack of 48-4, which is 12-1, and again with the snow there was a -2 odd shift, which made it a 10-1 assault against the city, and it turned into an automatic attack. So it was a rather bloodless attack, nothing really to see there, no die roll even required. The Germans, as you can see, have occupied the country, and they are now set up to invade Belgium next, and then on into France. So what I'll do is I will probably give you a blow-by-blow of the German invasion of France, possibly even Belgium, to see how that goes. That'll be a little more interesting. There are a few more Belgian units that will set up that the Germans will have to contend with, so there might be a little bit more there for you to watch and see. The rest of January, February, it continued to snow pretty much everywhere in Europe. There was a battle in the Faroes Gap. The home fleet did end up finding the German Kriegsmarine that were up there, the Atlantischer Task Force. And in the ensuing engagement, even though the Germans were heavily outnumbered, both sides had 1 light cruiser sunk and 2 light cruisers damaged before the Germans aborted back to Kiel, which they arrived at safely. Aside from that, over in China, in central China, in the east, the Japanese did manage to launch an attack here out of Hangzhou on the Chinese cavalry corps that was located in the mountains here. They eliminated the cavalry corps for no loss to the Japanese. However, all of the attacking units were inverted, including the headquarters unit here, Terauchi, which prevented them from following up the attack any further in the turn. However, I do want to maybe go through in a little detail the U.S. entry phase for the end of January, February, because a few things happened there, and let's go take a look at that now. Now, the situation at the start of U.S. entry at the end of the January-February turn, the U.S. had 3 chits in each pool, totaling 8 in the German-Italian pool and 7 in the Japanese pool. They drew their chit for the end of the turn and decided to place it in the Japanese pool, which would give them 4 chits in the Japanese pool, totaling 8 to match the 8 in the German-Italian pool. They were anticipating selecting an option or two against the Japanese, and they wanted to make sure that they were going to have plenty of chits in case any of them moved to the tension pool. This also gives them an entry level against both the German and Italians of 16. You have 8 times 1.5 gives you 12, plus 8 times 0.5, which is 4, so 12 and 4 is 16, and it's the exact same for the Japanese because they've got 8 worth of chits in the Japanese pool, making it 12 plus 4, 16 and 16. With that in mind, the United States selected entry option number 13, embargo on strategic materials. Now the tension value for that option is a 5. When they rolled the die, they did in fact roll a 5, which caused one of the chits to move from the entry pool into the tension pool. The random draw revealed it to be one of the 1 chits, so that chit moved into the Japanese pool, Japanese tension pool. Now, because that chit moved from the entry pool to the tension pool, they were unable to select a second option against Japan. However, they could still select an option against the Germans and Italians, which they did. They chose to select option 14, Edward R. Murrow reporting. Now, this option allows the U.S. to treat the tension level for any of their subsequent options as either 1 higher or 1 lower. So this will give them some control, a little better control over chits moving from the entry pool into the tension pool. If you look at the ITS war chart, you'll see that you'll need some level of tension as well as entry. The best chance you have of declaring war as the U.S., you're going to want to be in this area of the chart, which you'll see is anywhere from about 44 to 60 in U.S. entry level versus 17 to 40, say, in tension. So without enough tension, your chances of declaring war are very poor. And if you have too much tension, same thing can happen. So by selecting the Edward R. Murrow reporting, that allows them to, like I said, treat a 5 tension value as either a 4 or a 6, depending upon whether they want to move chits into the tension pool or try to retain them in the entry pool. Now, the tension value for the option 14 against the Germans and Italians was a 3, and the U.S. ended up rolling a 2, which caused one of their chits to move into the tension pool as well. The random draw determined that it was one of their 3 chits, so that moves over into the tension pool. And because they moved a chit into the tension pool, they're unable to make that second selection against the Germans and Italians. So their options are finished for this turn. They had 1 against the Japanese and 1 against the Germans. At the end of that, with all of the chits moving around, you'll see that their entry level against the Germans and Italians, now with 2 chits totaling 5, that would be 7.5 plus 3.5 from Japan, gives us an entry level of 11 against the Germans and Italians, with a tension level of 4.5 plus 1/2 of 5. So 11 entry and 5 tension. For the Japanese, it's going to be 10.5 plus 2.5 is 13 for an entry level. And their tension, however, is only going to be 1.5 plus 1.5 of 3. So that gives you a little idea, hopefully, of how the U.S. entry works without going over the rules so much. And I'll try and do some more sort of play-by-play as we get deeper into the game. And like I said, coming up with the German invasion of Belgium and France, we'll probably do a blow-by-blow and let you guys see some counters being pushed and dice being rolled in more of a playthrough style rather than just an after-action report. That kind of wraps it up for January, February 1940. Stay tuned. We got March, April 40 coming up. If the weather's good, there's probably going to be some action heating up here on the Western Front. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.